In the heart of a bleak, uninviting town stood the old Museum of Curiosities, a place where shadows lingered longer than they should, as if they had come to call it home. The weathered building loomed over the townsfolk like a colossal guardian, its crumbling facade whispering tales of the past, riddled with cracks that told stories of forgotten times. The townspeople often walked by with hurried steps, their gazes averted, as if the air around the museum was thick with secrets best left undisturbed. It was here, wrapped in layers of dust and mystery, that the infamous Devil's Chair rested, an eerie relic that was the centerpiece of local folklore. Very few dared to speak of it openly. Those brave enough to do so exchanged nervous glances, as if the mere mention of the chair could invoke something sinister hiding in the shadows. One dreary autumn evening, as leaves fluttered down from the trees like tired whispers, the museum prepared to close for the night. Yet, the air inside crackled with an energy that seemed to pulse with anticipation. A group of eager teenagers, intrigued by tales of the dark chair, had made their way into the museum, breaking in despite the risk of getting caught. Driven by an insatiable thirst for adventure and the thrill of uncovering the truth, they crept through the aging halls, whispering excitedly about the chair's so-called malevolent power. Its legend promised thrilling supernatural encounters and dark secrets that had been locked away for generations, drawing in both the curious and the foolhardy alike. Among them was Jamie, a headstrong girl with messy brown hair and an infectious laugh. She often brushed aside tales of the uncanny, mocking the idea that something so mundane as a chair could hold any real power. "It's just an old, dusty chair," she would say, rolling her eyes at her friends. But deep down, even she felt a twinge of excitement mixed with apprehension. A small part of her wondered what the chair might hold, why it was shrouded in mystery. As the clock struck midnight, its eerie chime echoed through the museum, resonating with the spirits of the past. The group huddled around the chair, their skepticism clinging to them like a shroud despite the palpable silence that surrounded them. The Devil's Chair was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its wood was gnarled and jagged, a twisted spectacle of craftsmanship gone awry. The upholstery was tattered and torn, adorned with dark stains that seemed to absorb the dim light around it, giving the chair an almost lifelike quality. Jamie felt an unsettling energy radiating from it, an inexplicable sensation that made her skin prickle and her heart beat faster. "Come on," she urged, trying to mask the unease that bubbled just beneath the surface of her bravado. "It's just a chair, let's prove everyone wrong." With a dreadful sense of fate tugging at her, Jamie gathered her courage and settled into the chair, the rough fabric scraping against her skin. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. As she sat, the world around her faded, slipping away like a forgotten dream, replaced by a realm cloaked in shadows. The other teens chirped nervously, their encouragement echoing in her ears like distant whispers, but Jamie could hardly hear them over the rush of adrenaline in her veins. Instead, she felt something cold wash over her, creeping in like a mist that crawled over her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "Do you wish to know your fate?" a chilling voice rasped in her ear. It was guttural, lurking in the depths of her mind like a long-forgotten specter. Jamie's heart halted for a moment, fear knotting in her stomach like a twisted ball of yarn. She blinked, trying to shake off the sensation, but the pressure intensified, clamping down on her thoughts and squeezing them into a single, terrifying question: acceptance or rejection? The choice loomed ominously before her, a seesaw teetering on the edge of a precipice. The chair seemed to tug at her, inviting her deeper into its dark embrace. The laughter of her friends faded, replaced by the howling wind that seemed to swirl around her, echoing from the very walls of the museum. It was as if the very foundation of the place was conjuring up a tempest, a storm of possibilities and consequences that danced just beyond her reach. Jamie felt the pull of fate, a haunting invitation that promised enlightenment, but at a grave cost. She struggled to resist, but an otherworldly force gripped her tighter, enveloping her in a vice of dark temptation. Meanwhile, her friends whispered together in hushed tones, their enthusiasm dwindling as they glimpsed the change in Jamie's demeanor. Laughter hung heavily in the air but soon suffocated under the oppressive weight of apprehension. Mark, one of the boys, stepped closer, his brow furrowed with concern. "Jamie, are you okay?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly, a tremor that echoed the unease in the room. But Jamie remained motionless, ensnared in a web woven from fear and intrigue. In that moment, she became an unwilling participant in a game far beyond her understanding. The unseen dark began to swirl around her, and each pulse of the chair resonated with her heartbeat, forming an unsettling symphony of dread. The corners of her vision darkened, shadows skirting the edges of her mind like angry whispers. Something sinister was awakening, and it was hungry. Suddenly, a cold gust of air enveloped the room, extinguishing their feeble overhead lights. Screams erupted from the group, panic flooding the atmosphere as the very walls seemed to groan, alive with malevolence. Jamie glanced toward her friends, their faces pale, twisted with dread as they moved back like startled rabbits. She wanted to call out, to reassure them, but the voice returned, stronger, drowning out her worries with its insidious melody. Your destinies are intertwined, and the reckoning will be swift. Do you dare break the circle? It hissed, wrapping its tendrils around her mind, squeezing tightly. Jamie's resistance began to crumble, its ghostly fingers dripping with envy, eager for her acquiescence. The chair became a portal of unnerving potential, offering glimpses of futures both amazing and horrifying, like a kaleidoscope spinning madly out of control. The air thickened, cloying and oppressive, as Jamie finally responded, her voice a barely audible whisper. Yes, she uttered, the weight of her choice crashing upon her with the relentless force of a tidal wave. A churning sensation washed over her like electric waves cascading through her veins. Shadows expanded and danced around her, a swirling amalgamation of terrifying tales and whispered promises. The museum, once a sanctuary of curiosities, transformed into a cacophony of dread, an echo of forgotten dreams and lost souls. Yet, in that deepening darkness, her friends grabbed her by her arms, pulling her desperately from the clutches of the chair. Get out, you have to get out of there, Mark yelled, panic blazing in his eyes as he reached out. Jamie stumbled backward as the spell of the chair broke, the simmering force pulling back like a retreating tide. She felt a loss, as if something precious had slipped through her fingers, leaving behind a lingering promise that tugged and entwined within her spirit, whispering of things she could scarcely understand. As the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the chilling shadows that danced on the walls, the group stood together, hearts racing and faces pale. Deep down, Jamie sensed it, the malignant influence of the chair lurking in her thoughts like a slithering serpent, a reminder of her choice that she could not shake off. While nervous laughter erupted among her friends as they brushed off the panic, her heart remained heavy with a feeling of unease. Something irrevocable had shifted within her, and she understood that she would never truly be free. The chair had marked her, for better or worse, weaving its dark secret into the fabric of her fate. They stumbled back toward the entrance, the atmosphere thick with tension and dread. Jamie's mind raced as she tried to push away the shadows that clung to her thoughts. What had she awakened in that moment of weakness? Why had she chosen to give in? The air felt charged, as if the museum itself were holding its breath, waiting. As they stepped out into the cool night air, they were greeted by the soft sounds of the town settling into slumber. The moon hung high, its silver glow casting long shadows on the ground. For a moment, Jamie felt relief wash over her, a promise of safety in the outside world. But as they walked home, the laughter among her friends faded, replaced by the heavy silence of uncertainty. Would they talk about what happened? Would they dare return? Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of her choice pressing down on her shoulders. In the days that followed, whispers of the devil's chair grew in the corners of the town. Jamie could overhear snippets of conversations while walking through the market, a chilling rumor here, a daring challenge there. Children exchanged daring bets, daring each other to venture into the haunted museum. The air buzzed with speculation, but Jamie could only sit silently, her mind clouded with images of that night. The chair was no longer just an object, it had become a living thing in her thoughts, stirring every time she closed her eyes. She felt as if she had become part of the legends, a character in an unfolding tale that she never wanted to join. But the more she tried to push it away, the more it consumed her. With every passing day, Jamie realized that she was being drawn into a pattern of darkness she had unwittingly awakened. Her friends began to notice changes in her. "You seem different," one of them remarked during lunch at school. Jamie shrugged them off, plastering a smile on her face. "I'm fine," she insisted, but inside, she felt like a storm was brewing. Secrets danced just out of reach, and Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The air around her grew heavy with tension as she caught glimpses of shadows darting at the fringes of her vision. Alone in her room at night, she'd hear soft whispers that would fade as soon as she turned to listen. The laughter and cheers that had once brought her joy began to feel hollow, as if the world outside was cloaked in a thin veil of darkness that threatened to pull her in again. Sometimes, she would even find herself wandering to the edge of the town, her heart pounding, drawn toward the museum like a moth to a flame. As Halloween approached, the air crackled with excitement. Decorations adorned the houses, jack-o'-lanterns flickered with soft glows, and stories of ghosts and ghouls filled the atmosphere. Jamie felt a mixture of longing and dread. Every story spoken around the fire seemed to echo her own experience with the chair. The legends became more exaggerated. According to the chatter among her peers, the chair was a direct link to the spirit world, a place where wishes could either come true or curse you. One evening, as Jamie sat in her room, a strange impulse pulled her toward her window. The moon shone bright, casting a silver path leading through the trees toward the old Museum of Curiosities. Before she could stop herself, she grabbed her jacket and slipped out the door, moving through the familiar, winding streets with a heavy heart. The museum loomed before her, a familiar yet ominous figure in the night. Jamie approached cautiously, the air around her thick with anticipation and fear. Dread filled her, but the pull of curiosity was stronger. Little did she know, the chair awaited her. Its shadows stretched long, beckoning her back into the depths of its secrets. What was it that awaited her in that cursed seat? Answers? Chaos? Or something far more sinister? Her heart raced as she hesitated at the entrance, torn between the safety of the night and the call of the unknown that whispered her name. With one last breath, she pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly as if welcoming her back home. The darkness encircled her once more, and she couldn't help but feel the chair was waiting hungrily, like an old friend eager to share its secrets once again. To be continued. Asterisk. Days turned into nights, and though Jamie tried hard to shake off the haunting experience that had shaken her to the core, the shadows clung to her like a stubborn fog that wouldn't lift. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out to grasp her heart, squeezing tight. Her friends had quickly moved on, brushing off the frightening encounter as a mere trick of the mind. They laughed and told ghost stories at sleepovers, their eyes sparkling with excitement. But Jamie knew different. She understood, in a way they didn't, that the shadows whispering in her ears held a truth that would chill them to their very bones. Each evening became a fierce struggle against sounds that should not exist. Murmurs in still corners, whispers that slithered through the silence, and shadowy figures flitting just beyond her vision, darting away when she turned to look. The old, sinister chair from the museum had woven its way into her very being, wrapping itself around her soul like a parasite that fed off her sanity, its clutches dragging her further into an abyss of dread. Jamie often found herself at the museum, despite every ounce of her better judgment screaming at her to stay away. The pull of its unsettling atmosphere drew her closer, almost magnetically. It felt like the ancient building itself was calling to her, inviting her back into its dark embrace. Each time she stepped through the museum's heavy doors, the same familiar sense of dread filled her. The chair seemed to beckon her, casting a spell woven from threads of both curiosity and terror. It was as if she were walking into a storm, the clouds of fear swirling ominously above her head. Night after night, she was plagued by horrific nightmares. Each time she closed her eyes, visions of grotesque shapes loomed over her, twisted figures with hollow eyes and grim smiles, while sinister murmurs echoed in the stillness that enveloped her room. Above all else, she dreamt of the chair, and each dream found the malevolent voice growing clearer, louder, and more insistent than the last. "Join me, embrace your destiny," it would chant, its words a twisted lullaby that wrapped around her mind like a noose, tightening as she fought to break free. The voice felt sweet yet poisonous, a beckoning call to whatever dark force lay buried beneath the surface. As the days turned into weeks, Jamie began to dread sleep. Daylight merged seamlessly into a twilight of exhaustion, her dreams robbing her of the restful peace she longed for. A shroud of dread clung to her, palpable and heavy, hanging in the air like a thick fog. The townsfolk started noticing Jamie's increasing unease, her nervous fidgeting, her long stares into the distance as if she were watching something that only she could see. Whispers of her strangeness circulated through the town like wildfire, igniting concern amongst her friends. "What's wrong with Jamie?" they wondered, puzzled by her sudden distance and retreat into herself. She felt her heart ache with loneliness, watching her friends share smiles while she remained overshadowed by a terrible burden. One balmy evening, with the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jamie found herself standing in front of the chair once again. It was as if a strange force was pulling her forward, an invisible thread she could hardly comprehend. The museum had closed for the night, its dark corners concealed in shadows, but she had snuck in with trembling hands, the chill of the evening brushing against her skin as the shadows swallowed her whole. The air felt dense around her, thick and oppressive, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. "Why do you keep returning, Jamie?" The voice echoed off the museum walls, thick with ripple-like satisfaction that clawed at each syllable. She recoiled, feeling a stab of ice wash over her, a bitter reminder of the dark pact she had unwittingly formed with whatever malevolence resided in that chair. To cast aside your fears and seek enlightenment? Or does the chair possess an unholy pull stronger than reason? The voice taunted her, dancing along the threads of her sanity. With her heart hammering in her chest, Jamie felt drawn closer to the chair. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, trying to sound brave, though her voice quaked at the edges despite her resolve. The chair only throbbed with anticipation, its energy seeming to pulse in the air, the promise of dark knowledge swirling around her like an oily mist. With gritted teeth, she dared herself to reach out, her fingertips trembling as they brushed against the worn fabric of the chair. A jolt of icy electricity raced through her body, freezing her in place. Suddenly, a vision struck her, a horrifying glimpse of a past she had never known. Dark flashes filled her mind, funeral processions filled with anguished faces etched with grief, shadowy figures weeping in despair, and shadows twisting and writhing at the edges of her vision. The chair had swallowed many before her, and in that moment, she could feel their anguish seeping through the cracks of the past, melding with her own reality. Panicked, Jamie ripped her hand away, breathless and trembling as the echoes of their suffering resonated within her. "No, I'm leaving," she screamed at the dark corners, her voice breaking with sheer terror. Yet a chilling laugh erupted from within the heart of the chair. It was blasphemous, mocking her, a promise echoing that she could never escape its influence. She fled the museum, the specter of the chair lingering in her mind like a haunting ghost, an echo of despair trailing behind her. Days slipped by, and Jamie's life began to unravel more quickly than a spool of thread pulled too tight. Each passing night, her dreams twisted further into nightmarish realms, visions of distorted faces and gnarled figures clawing at her sanity. The world faded around her, blurring the edges of her reality. Time itself became elusive, slipping through her fingers like grains of sand in an hourglass turned sideways. Friends became distant. Their voices faded to echoes of the past, and laughter turned hollow. The very essence of friendship felt like an unreachable horizon while she remained isolated, trembling in a void brimming with dread. The weight of her sorrow shattered her spirit, a wretched existence as shadows danced in the corners of her vision, always flickering at the edges but never fully revealing themselves. Jamie could feel the chair's presence looming, an omnipotent force waiting patiently at the fringes of her consciousness, eager for her to succumb to its dark embrace. Each day drew closer to a terrible conclusion, and the solitude that stretched before her became unbearable. It felt like the sun had vacated her skies, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of doom, thick and suffocating, as if she were trapped in a never-ending night. Another visit to the chair drew near, inevitable like the pull of the tide. This time, she did not sneak in like a frightened child. She resolved to confront the chair, to battle the malevolence that was intertwined with her fate. As night fell, painting everything in shades of deep blue and black, she slipped through the museum's heavy doors once more. The air shimmered with tension, her heartbeat loud in her ears, thudding like a war drum echoing in a distant battle. "Enough games," Jamie shouted into the palpable silence, her voice ringing like a bell in the darkness. Yet instead of receiving a response, the shadows only laughed back, a cruel echo that bounced around the room, swirling like a dark wind waiting to unleash a storm. Jamie knew she had been ensnared in a game of manipulation, her spirit caught in the web of a force greater than herself, a puppet dancing at the fingers of an unseen conductor. "I've chosen this," she declared, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What more do you want?" Her voice wavered, echoing amidst the shadows that flickered ominously, teasing her stability. Everything, the dark voice hissed, pride dripping from every word. Your fear, your soul, and the despair of countless souls worn thin. The chair seemed to pulsate, its power swelling until Jamie felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, caught in the eye of an approaching storm. It felt like the very fabric of reality twisted around her, warping under the weight of despair. As Jamie felt the tendrils of darkness wrap around her once more, reaching out to ensnare her, she understood her role. Her soul stood at a dangerous crossroads, tangled in the threads of choices that had led her here. She felt the whispers of countless lost souls pleading with her to flee, to resist the increasingly strong pull toward darkness. But instead of retreating, she remained, drawn into an inescapable abyss, blinded by the grotesque promise of clarity that lay just out of reach. And thus, with one final, desperate gasp for resolve, she succumbed, plunging headlong into despair, a creeping shadow that swallowed not just her, but every flicker of light that had once illuminated her path. As the darkness wrapped around her, Jamie understood that there was no turning back. She had crossed an invisible line, and now she was entwined with the very spirit of the chair, a willing captive to a fate she had never asked for, trapped in a world of whispers, shadows, and a past that beckoned her to join it. As days melted into weeks, Jamie's life twisted like a tangled ball of yarn, spinning wildly into chaos and uncertainty. Shadows crept into every corner of her cozy room and danced along the streets of her little town. They were no longer mere shapes, they had become dark figures, whispering secrets to each other in hushed tones. The joyful laughter of her friends faded away, replaced by uneasy glances and anxious whispers. It was as if the magic of childhood had slipped through her fingers, leaving her feeling lost and bewildered. Jamie felt as if the threads of her sanity were unraveling like an old sweater, revealing a dismal tapestry woven from her deepest fears and the sinister grip of the devil's chair. Every night, the chair loomed large in her mind, a grotesque reminder of the choice she had made, a choice she regretted more with each passing day. The tales she had heard, the whispers of power and truth, now felt like heavy chains binding her to a darkness she couldn't escape. Its promise of truth became entangled with the silent screams of those who had come before her, those who had vanished into thin air after they had sat upon its cursed seat. The desperation clawed at her heart, urging her ever closer to that dark seat, wrapping around her pulse like a cold and alarming embrace. Somewhere deep inside her, the flickering flame of resistance began to dim, and dread consumed her thoughts like storm clouds covering a once sunny sky. However, Jamie was not one to surrender easily. She fought fiercely, determined to grasp her reality tightly, supplanting her wavering courage with a ferocious defiance. She became like a knight clad in armor, ready to battle whatever dark force threatened to engulf her. With her heart racing, Jamie dug deeper into the legend of the chair, scouring the dusty old records in the town's library, searching for a forgotten way to cut the strings that bound her to it. One rainy afternoon, while sifting through piles of yellowed papers, she stumbled upon a faded newspaper article that made her freeze. It described another victim, an unfortunate boy named Nathan, who had mysteriously vanished after sitting in the chair. The chilling photograph that accompanied the article made her heart race. Nathan's shadowy gaze echoed the haunting stares she had witnessed in her nightmares. It was a connection that sent an icy shiver down her spine and tightened the knot of fear deep in her stomach. She felt an invisible hand clenching around her throat. Determined to defend herself at all costs, Jamie gathered everything she could find about ancient rituals, medieval texts, scrawled notes, and folk tales from her grandmother's stories. She clung to hope, desperately wanting to believe that these forgotten practices could protect her from the sinister grip that was gnawing at the edges of her soul. As she prepared her materials, candles that flickered with ominous light, salt that sparkled like tiny stars, and grains of incense that smelled sweet yet tangy, the weight of her fear pressed down on her, as heavy as a stone. Each step she took felt like crossing a dangerous tightrope. Remembering Nathan's lost gaze, she lit the candles and arranged them in a defensive circle, their flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. The dim flickering light seemed both inviting and threatening, a dance of hope and fear. Jamie felt a surge of desperation. It was now or never. She closed her eyes and began to chant the forgotten words she had painstakingly memorized, each syllable a fragile thread spun with equal parts hope and terror. The shadows reluctantly receded slightly, as if they were unsure of her resolve. The air thickened around her, filled with a heavy anticipation. For the first time in many nightmarish evenings, she felt an odd sense of empowerment, like a small spark in her heart pushing back against the darkness. But just as the light flickered with promise, a low rumble filled the room, a noise that seemed to come from the very depths of the chair itself. Jamie's heart raced again as an unsettling laugh curled around her room like a chill wind brushing against her skin. It was sharp and cruel, quickening her heartbeat like a hunted animal. "You cannot abandon me," the haunting voice hissed, twisting through her thoughts like a serpent. "Your fear is the key. You belong to me now." The ground beneath her shuddered as shadows swirled, a tempest of chaos just beyond her grasp. The candles flickered wildly, gasping for breath, and in that moment, Jamie felt her hope dampen, the stronghold she had built around herself cracking under pressure. She realized the pact she had forged with the chair could not simply be cast aside. It loomed large and grotesque, like a fog that wrapped around her with relentless tenacity. With her heart pounding incessantly like a drum in her chest, she fought against the creeping dread, anchoring herself to the reality she desperately wanted to hold on to. "I refuse to go back," she shouted defiantly into the ominous darkness. But her brave words quaked in the oppressive air, swallowed by the eerie and sinister laughter that echoed ominously in every shadow. To her surprise, a flicker of clarity emerged through the panic she was engulfed in. The lessons she had reluctantly learned along this dark path began to solidify in her mind. She had discovered that her fear was the very source of the chair's power. It fed off her despair like a hungry wolf waiting for its prey to falter. With newfound determination, and a feeling similar to standing tall in front of a ferocious storm, she hurled the grains of incense into the chaos, flames licking upward, eager light battling against the thick blanket of darkness. For just a moment, the shadows recoiled, slinking back as Jamie pressed on, drawing strength from the resolve that had blossomed within her like a flower determined to bloom among the cracks of concrete. "Begone!" she cried, her voice ringing powerful and firm, echoing defiantly in the dim light, a blend of desperation and resolve trembling in each word. The chair shook violently in response, vibrating through her very core as if merely the act of defiance had shaken the malevolent spirit buried deep within its wooden frame. Yet, as the darkness wavered like smoke in the wind, Jamie felt the gnawing sensation that this might be a hollow victory. Her resistance faltered as self-doubt began to creep back in. The darkness was relentless, just like the waves of the sea that always crash onto the shore. She could almost feel the roots of despair slithering back into her mind, tendrils searching eagerly for new doubts, new fears to gnaw on, ready to erase the confidence she had just unearthed. "You cannot escape me," the wicked voice coiled around her heart like a tightly wound serpent, thrumming with malicious delight. "Your connection is eternal, as is your fury. Your essence shall nourish the void." Amidst the oppressive shadows, Jamie faced a harrowing realization with a heavy soul. She had been unwittingly bound to the chair, a twisted string knotted into the fabric of her fate. The more she fought, the tighter its grip became, the deeper the threads wound themselves around her consciousness until every struggle felt like a battle against quicksand. Trepidation encased her like a shroud, a damp blanket of fear that made it hard to breathe. The hollow thrill of defiance melted away, revealing the bitter truth beneath. As the shadows gathered around her, Jamie steeled herself, taking a deep, shaky breath, trying to find a flicker of confidence to shield her. She remembered what had brought her this far. The tales of bravery told by her grandmother, soldiers who fought against terrible beasts, mythical creatures defeated with cleverness and spirit. In that moment, Jamie realized that her fight was not simply against the chair but against the darkness itself, embodied in her fears and insecurities. She could summon the courage to confront not just the chair but the shadows of self-doubt lurking within her. Taking a deep breath, she began to gather her thoughts, pushing aside the ancient whispers in her mind. "You may think you hold power over me," Jamie shouted, her voice stronger than before, "but I will no longer let fear guide my choices. I will face you." With renewed resolve, she grabbed the salt, pouring it along the perimeter of her candle circle. It sparkled like tiny stars trapped on the floor, pushing the shadows further away. Jamie felt an electricity in the air, a promise of strength burning in her chest. "You are nothing but a shadow, a trick of the light. You cannot defeat my spirit." The chair thrashed, as if enraged by her defiance. A chilling gust whipped through her room, and she felt the darkness clawing at her, trying to slither back into her mind. But she stood firm, remembering Nathan and all those who had come before her. She thought of the laughter of her friends, the sunlight streaming through the trees, the joy of life beyond the touch of the chair. Out of the dimness, she began to chant once more, the words spilling from her lips like a melody, ancient and powerful. They were her armor, her shield against the encroaching darkness. As she chanted, the shadows began to flicker and fade, their forms twisting and writhing as though in pain. Jamie felt their power waning, and with every word she spoke, the light grew brighter, illuminating the corners of her room, dispelling the chilling darkness. She was taking the fight to them, refusing to allow fear to steal her spirit. Battling against the wild chaos, she felt her heart swell with newfound strength. "You will not claim me," she shouted with fierce determination. "I choose light. I choose hope." Suddenly, the laughter faded, replaced by a whispering breeze that felt almost like a sigh of surrender. The shadows began to dissolve, retreating into the corners from whence they came, reluctant but powerless against her resolve. The chair seemed to shake one last time, a final protest, but Jamie was undeterred. She focused, armoring herself with belief and bravery, sweeping the last of the shadows from her mind. In a moment of stillness, her room breathed again, a safe haven once more, free from the shackles of doubt and darkness. Jamie stood in the circle of flickering candlelight, breathing deeply as the weight of fear began to lift, like fog disappearing under the morning sun. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, though she knew the fight was not over. The chair still existed, lurking patiently in the distance, waiting for another opportunity to ensnare her. Jamie fell to her knees, tears of victory slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't just fighting to escape, she was fighting to reclaim her own happiness. She gathered her storm of emotions and wrapped herself tightly in the warm cloak of hope and resilience. The battle had been fierce, but she realized that within her lay the power to keep darkness at bay. With the shadows fading, Jamie understood her journey had taken a new turn. The pact she had unwittingly formed could be dismantled, piece by piece, with each glimmer of light she conjured from within. She could turn the pact of shadows into a pact of strength, promising herself to embrace hope and courage in every heartbeat. As she extinguished the flickering candles, shadows receding into the night, Jamie took a deep breath, steady and true. It was not about erasing fear but learning to rise above it. With this newfound understanding, she looked toward the dawn that would surely come, ready to face the morning light and protect her heart from the shadows of despair. Her battle was far from over, but now, she held the tools to forge her own destiny, one filled with laughter and light, banishing the whispers of darkness that once threatened to consume her. The days melted away, swallowed by darkness and despair, as Jamie spiraled further into existential dread. It felt like she was in a thick fog that wouldn't lift, where everything around her was dull and gray. The world, once so bright, seemed to fade into shadows that whispered secrets in her ears. The chair, an old piece of furniture that had captured her mind, now loomed larger in her life, turning from an object into a dark presence that seemed to consume all the joy and color that had once surrounded her. Routine activities became burdens. Each morning, Jamie would wake up and stare at the beautiful sunlight streaming through her window, but instead of feeling warmth, she felt cold and empty inside. Every laugh she once had faded, becoming just a memory. The sounds of birds chirping outside felt like they were part of someone else's life, far removed from her own. Her friends wondered why she wasn't playing outside anymore, why she never joined them at the park. Jamie had retreated into herself, hidden away in her house, avoiding the light because it made the shadows in her heart feel even darker. The chair's influence suffocated her, becoming an insatiable void in which she teetered, consumed by muted whispers of lost souls that begged for solace and oblivion. Every night as she lay in bed, she could hear the seductive calls of the chair, an alluring promise of peace that twisted her insides. The voices were soft, cooing like a lullaby, enticing her to listen, to surrender. "Just come closer," they seemed to say. "You will find freedom from your pain." Yet deep inside, she knew all too well that this promised freedom came at a terrible cost. Each night, she fought harder yet succumbed deeper, an endless cycle of panic and submission. It felt like running from an invisible monster that was always one step ahead of her, no matter how fast she moved. The shadows were alive around her, creeping closer and closer, whispering dark secrets that echoed at the edges of her sanity, tugging at her fragile sense of self. Jamie was no longer the brave girl who laughed loudly and played with her friends. She now felt as though she was slowly fading away, like a drawing slowly erased from a piece of paper. What had once been defiance was replaced with a creeping paralysis that held her hostage in a world of phantoms. The ordinary things she used to love, her favorite games, reading exciting stories, and even drawing, lost their magic. Instead, her imagination was filled with a fog of loneliness that wrapped around her heart, growing thicker with every passing day. On one fateful evening, Jamie stood shivering before the chair, her heart thumping in her chest like a drum. She felt like a shadow of her former self, terrified and exhausted. Tired of hiding from the outside world, she stood before the grotesque form of the chair, which pulsed with a darkness that seemed to beckon her closer. It almost looked alive, its stains and wrinkles twisting and moving in a way that sent a chill running down her spine. It was as if the chair was taunting her, promising clarity that she craved while reminding her of the despair she feared. Through its hollow, stained fabric, indescribable echoes beckoned her closer, inviting her back into its cold embrace. She felt the atmosphere shift, the air growing thick with anticipation as the chair's whispers wrapped around her like tendrils, filling her head with thoughts that melted her resolve. With a deep breath, she asked herself what she truly wanted. Is it worth it? Is it worth the fear? Embrace the truth, a voice coiled around her heart, buoying her up, whispering sweetly, entangling her thoughts in a sticky web of seduction. They are but phantoms, and you, my dear, you shall become a part of the eternal night. The promise sounded inviting, but a flicker of doubt sparked inside her. Could she really give in? With a dreadful clarity, Jamie hesitated, standing at the precipice. An overwhelming blend of sorrow and resignation flooded through her. The weight of her past pressed down heavily on her shoulders, memories of laughter interwoven with those of being left alone. Perhaps this was the ending she had sought to avoid, the fracturing of herself into a myriad of tormented echoes. Perhaps the chair promised an end to the nightmare, even as it lured her into its merciless clutches. Her courage waning, Jamie sank into its embrace, feeling the chill wrap around her once more. The shadows surged forth, greedily coalescing around her, whispering things that made her ache inside. As she nestled deeper into the chair, she felt as if she were sinking into a thick, dark pool of water, where the surface above her was lost and unreachable. The whispers echoed louder, drowning out the remnants of resistance that still flickered within. You are home now, child. Welcome to your fate. Each word sent icy shivers coursing through her body, tying her down, and as she listened, a part of her began to think that maybe they were right. Maybe this was true peace. A violent jolt of realization skittered through her mind, merging with anguish and terror. Jamie felt a mix of emotions swirl within her like a tempest: fear, longing, sorrow. The malevolent chair claimed her with predatory delight, sending tremors rippling through her existence. She was becoming part of something larger, but as the darkness folded over her like a blanket, she realized how much she was losing. Her essence, her very being, began to drift away like leaves carried off by the wind. Visions of the past flooded her mind, drowning her in a deluge of memories: the laughter of her best friend, Nathan, the games they played, the picnics by the lake where they ate sandwiches and shared secrets. But those were all gone now. She remembered his screams, the anguish of lost spirits echoing through her memories, each echo reverberating through her being, each one a reminder of the connection she had lost. No longer an outsider, Jamie became a hollow vessel, filled only with shadows and memories. She felt more like a ghost than a girl, a whisper in the wind. The threads of her existence seemed to unravel as the weight of countless regrets coalesced around her. Each regret brought forth a wave of sadness that pushed her deeper into the chair's clutches, where comfort became a memory, and pain turned into a companion. What had once brought her joy now felt like a cruel joke. The suffocating embrace of the chair wrapped around her like chains, darkness silencing the last remnants of her will. Jamie had become yet another fragment in the ever-growing tapestry of despair, forever tethered to the immovable chair. The sinister energy pulsed through her being, siphoning her essence deeper into the abyss, a darkness so vast that it threatened to swallow her whole. The haunting sounds of her own laughter mixed with the cacophony of the Forsaken, creating a symphony of fear and longing that echoed through the now dim museum. Each note felt like a dagger, a reminder of what she had lost and what she might never regain. As dawn broke, The sun struggled against the haunting shadows that clung resolutely to the museum's walls. The golden rays reached for Jamie, almost desperately trying to pull her back to the world of the living, but it was too late now. Jamie was no longer just a girl filled with dreams and laughter. She was now a whisper of sorrow, lost among the haunting echoes of the Devil's Chair, trapped in an unholy pact from which escape was impossible. In the graveyard of forgotten souls, she stood forever marked, a restless specter burdened by the unspeakable horrors of her plight. The chair had not just taken her body, it had feasted on her spirit. With every passing hour, she shivered, caught in a loop of remembrance and despair, holding within her the weight of countless lives she couldn't save. The darkness surrounding her deepened as she realized that her story was far from over. In the depths of her despair, a new feeling began to stir within her, a flicker of defiance. Even in the embrace of the chair, which now felt like a shroud rather than a comfort, Jamie wondered if the whispers could be silenced. If she could break free from this eternal night, what if she could turn away from the shadows that surrounded her? What if she could reclaim the laughter she once knew? As she stood there, something in her sparked, a small glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could still find a way to break the curse that bound her to the chair. Wouldn't it be worth every fight to feel the sunshine again, to hear the laughter of her friends, and to reclaim her life? As the first rays of dawn broke over the walls of the museum, Jamie took a shaky breath, grasping tightly onto that tiny glimmer of hope. It was weak, but it was there, like a candle flickering against the dark. Maybe her story was not finished yet after all. Maybe she could find the strength to rise from the depths of despair and finally break free from the Devil's Chair. After all, even the darkest night must eventually come to an end.